From the 1011 Now streaming studio in Lincoln, Nebraska, this is the REPORT Husker Show, sponsored by Fat Dog's Convenience Store.
Hi, everyone. Bill Rentschler alongside Chase Madison in the 1011 Now streaming studio for another edition of the REPORT Husker Show, brought to you by Fat Dog's Convenience Store. Chase, after last week, I feel like the fan base, the program was in a bit of a fragile place because then you go on the road to Ohio State, you're 3-4 touchdown underdogs, and things could have gotten really bad really quick, but this was a really good game today. The Huskers do lose 21-17, but there's a lot of fight in that team. Rule got that team turned around pretty quickly over the last week.
Yeah, I was talking to you before we started this that on paper, this is, just another loss in the loss column, but so much more to be happy about if you're a Nebraska fan, and let alone Nebraska fan if you're Matt Rule and this team moving forward. And like last week, I think they hope that looking back on this season, last week is the one oddity that kind of stands out, right? It's a close loss to Illinois in overtime that, they didn't feel like themselves in the overtime period, but really was a game that they were in for the majority of the game. Today, they're in the game for the entire game.
Had the lead in the fourth quarter.
And first time they had a lead in the fourth quarter versus a top 5 team since 2009 against Texas for Nebraska. So, people were talking on social media and the buzz was starting as this game got closer in the second half, but rightfully so, because it wasn't that like Ohio State was shooting themselves in the foot and making a ton of mistakes. Obviously, Will Howard that had that one bad interception that was right down the goal line. Well, it didn't lead to any Nebraska points. So really, this was a testament to Nebraska's defense really playing well and them keeping them in the game and at bay, where it wasn't like Ohio State was, how some of those top teams, they have a game where it's like they look uncharacteristic and then they pull it out at the end. Penn State earlier this year against Bowling Green, that was kind of an example where, people are talking, but it's like, oh, your top team's not playing up to their standards. Today, it was Nebraska playing up to the standards of Ohio State and really outplaying Ohio State at times where you thought that they had a chance to win, and they did, coming down with 2 minutes left in the final drive.
And, you go back to last week, all three phases of the game, offense, defense, special teams, really, again, worst game of the season for all three phases. And there are still things to fix, obviously, from this game. Again, you did lose. But special teams, it started off, with the opening kickoff. You kind of wondered, like, okay, here we go again, because it was a muffed kickoff. But John Hull, he goes 3 for 3 on field goals. He kicks a 54-yarder. And then, other than the muffed kick at the very beginning, the special teams, I think, played well. Defense bought their lunchbox today. They played really well. And, again, the offense, you could still see there's some issues there, but they did manage to at least move the ball on Ohio State. There were some periods there where they moved the ball pretty easily, it looked like, against Ohio State's defense.
Yeah, Nebraska definitely had the upper hand running the ball. There was a lot of, I guess the best word is chatter, the whole yards per play thing.
Mm-hmm.
It felt like they obviously were struggling with perimeter blocking and getting the ball on the outside, and to Nebraska's fans' demise, they kept running plays that were, you could call them sideways plays that are within a yard or a yard and a half of the line of scrimmage. And it is good to get a player like Corey Barney the ball in that sense, because it's maybe easier to get him the ball in that sense. But the offense was good running the ball, and there was some good throws from Raiola. He had a big run. He had a 38-yard rush. So there was a lot of good pieces, but there was still some issues on offense, especially with the dynamic passing game and trying to get the ball in the middle of the field. And you saw when they did get the ball in the middle of the field, it worked. Nair had a slant. Fedoni was open on a drag route that turned into a big play. And then the touchdown that was called down at the 1 and then Dowdell punches it in was also a slant route to Isaiah Nair. So a lot of good things from the offense, but really it was a testament to the defense. It held Ohio State to their least rushing yards all season, 64. They had more than 100 in every game so far this season until that. The least amount of points for Ohio State this year, 21. And the least amount of total yards for the Buckeyes, which was 285. Nebraska right next to them at 273. So really balanced game and really excellent performance from the Black Shirts.
Yep, held Ohio State's 2.1 yards per rush. Again, Jamari Butler, I thought, played a whale of a game. He was in the backfield quite a bit. I was surprised.
Career high 3 tackles for loss for Jamari Butler, or as Gus Johnson once mentioned during the broadcast, Jimmy Butler, Miami Heat guard.
Yes.
Broadcast, left some stuff to be desired in some of the calls. But then the other point I wanted to bring up was I definitely think this was one of the Big Ten's poorer officiated games.
Yep.
There has just been a lack of consistency in the Big Ten Conference. Rule's been penalized twice this season on the sidelines, and twice this season he's been penalized, and rightfully so. One time was in the Purdue game. He threw his headset. They deemed that as a way to get penalized. And then last week he complained to a ref holding one of the tablets, iPads on the sidelines.
Can't do
they
that.
also deemed that unsportsmanlike and basically an unsportsmanlike penalty on the coach. And if you get 2, you're ejected. But so that's 2 weeks. The last two Nebraska, not the last 2 Nebraska games, but 2 Nebraska games this season, Matt Rule has been penalized. Ryan Day, and the broadcast was clear as day, no pun intended, threw his headset down right in front of a ref. They got a sideline warning.
Mm-hmm.
So just confusion there. And then the biggest other thing, too, penalties aside, because I don't feel like there wasn't penalties that decided the game, right? So the penalties I don't have as much of an issue with. The spot of the ball, there was multiple, and Rule even mentioned one that was less talked about. The first down that was not a first down really kind of derailed them at the end of the first half.
Mm-hmm.
Who knows if they would have scored a touchdown. They still got points out of the situation, but it took 30 seconds off the clock, and it was clear as day that it was a first down.
Gus Johnson even called it a first down on the broadcast. Then all of a sudden, they had it still at third down.
The other really poor spot that I saw from the refs, and Rule doesn't want to speak too much on the refs because coaches can get fined and whatnot, and you don't want to be hating on your own conference. The other spot that I just thought should have been a better spot was after the Malcolm Hartzog interception, they get the ball down towards the goal line. They ran the ball, and I believe it was Emmett Johnson, or it might have been Dowdell, tackled at basically the half-yard line on 3rd and goal when they ran the ball.
That was the
Jalen Lloyd.
Sweep
It
to
was
Lloyd,
not.
yeah.
You're right. It was not Dowdell or sweep to Jalen Lloyd. He's tackled on like the half-yard line.
Yeah.
The ball is spotted more at like the 1.5 or 2, and then they call the big, option, the big run up the middle play where they stack the box and they add Ty Robinson, and they brought out personnel. Well, if that probably would have worked from the half-yard line. They ran it from like the 2. Dowdell jumps for the end zone from the 3. I don't care how athletic you are.
That's a long jump.
Yeah, you're going. He had to go nearly 9 feet, long ways to get into the end zone. So, I just thought overall the refereeing left a lot to be desired, and that was a talking point on social media, and it still is. But at the end of the day, it came down to putting all that aside. It came down to Nebraska having the ball with 2 minutes to go. Playing great defense. The defense kept them in the game and gave them an opportunity to go down and win the game. And, it came down to a freshman mistake. The moment got a little bit too big for Dylan. I thought he played pretty well throughout, and he makes good reads and decisions. But this one was looking down the seam, and he just got a little bit too, I think he got a little bit too giddy in the pocket, like a little too eager to get the ball out. Because obviously you don't want to take a sack when the clock with less than 2 minutes to go, and threw it right to the defender. So all that aside, you can't point too much blame on certain things. But there definitely has been a lot of talk online.
And Rule in his post-game press conference was very reflective after this loss. He gave sometimes you have a loss like that, coach can come in, sit right down, give me your questions. He talked for almost 5 minutes. and he was very deliberate in what he said, talking about how, there's no moral victories, but how proud he was of his team, and that he thought for the first time since he's been there was championship caliber football, at least in the locker room.
Well, and I think, that's what fans, want to hear, because, Rule has proven that he can turn around programs at Temple and at Baylor, but Nebraska, compared to Temple and Baylor, obviously, what he did at Baylor was pretty incredible, and then he took Temple to heights they'd never been before. It's a little bit different here, and I think this is why some of his reactionary is look at the work into the process, and kind of hang in there with me, because, and he even said, you guys have been here a while, you've seen other people try to do it, and it's not worked, and he said he might not know if it's going to work or not, and he's doing it his way. But I think the reason he echoed kind of those messages was because last week had a lot of the here we go again.
There's a lot of panic.
And that's just all the noise around the team, and that's what he's trying to avoid his players from hearing. So I think the message he tried to give today was, if there's a player that listens to what the media is talking about or what he had to say, he's this was great. This was good. This is along for the ride. Obviously, they would have liked the statement win. But yeah, a lot more methodical in his answers today, and I think it's just because of it's not just how they played today. If they had lost by 2 scores last week and, had a valiant effort last week, then, maybe he would have been a little bit different today. I've been hey, we needed to execute down the stretch, or that interception can't happen or whatever. But they got punched in the mouth and ran over last week. And then they come up and do this today. So I think that's why you saw his reaction of, look at the process. This is going to take time, but all good things to hear, in my opinion.
Yeah, last week was a loss that maybe in years past, maybe even last year, could have led to, again, they lost this week, but again, it could have been, they were 25-point underdogs. It could have been another game when it gets out of hand and you lose by 35, 40 points. But that wasn't the case this week. So I asked Kevin this last week. Again, beginning of the year, this season was going to be defined as, a successful season progress with a bowl game, maybe 6-7 wins. That was a lot of the prognostication. I feel like expectations maybe got a little ramped up with the start the season had. Is that still a successful season in your eyes for this team? Is bowl game, maybe getting an extra win in there, getting to 7 wins?
Well, so we were at this point last year, 5-3.
We were.
And then they didn't win another game.
They did not.
So, I think anything is better. No, I want to stay in the world of realism here. I think getting to a bowl game, you're happy about it, but with what this team showed today, kind of flushing out last week, what this team showed today, I think you'd be happy. You'd like to at least get a few more wins. And you'd like for the bowl game to be secured next week at home against a UCLA team that is still navigating and learning what the Big Ten is. And UCLA is a formidable opponent, but it's at home. And, it doesn't feel like we've had much winter weather yet, so it's not going to be like last year when Purdue had to come and, battle in the trenches. Because weather was definitely a factor at this point of the season. Even Illinois game was cold and windy last year at Illinois. So conditions inside have been pretty good. Obviously, I knock on wood because, November is coming. But next week against UCLA, I think that's the game that fans would hope and the team would hope is you secure a bowl. And then you get to 6-3, and you say, "Why not us for the rest of the season?" Right? Can you play spoiler to a USC team at USC? Right? They have an explosive offense, but they have lost some Big Ten games that they probably should have won. And then you host a pretty good Wisconsin team, and then you go play Iowa, which is always a tough opponent. So I think just a bowl game. You're happy with it if you're a fan. You're not satisfied if you're the team.
Yeah, I think that's probably right.
And you're not satisfied if you're a fan either, because that means you're losing 3 more games, right? So, at this point of the season last year, we were actually more of at a high.
Mm-hmm.
I think we're at more of a middle of the road at this point, even though we're more than halfway done the season. Last year, at this point, they had just finished an undefeated October. They went 5-3. They won their bye week, and things were looking good with home games on the schedule because it was at Wisconsin, but it was home against Iowa, it was home against Maryland, and it was at Wisconsin. So you're looking at the rest of the schedule. I think the team would
on
be
the road against Michigan State, and that was one of the puzzling losses last
year.
Yeah.
I think looking at the rest of the schedule and just looking at how they played today, I think that the way they played today will give a vote of confidence.
Yeah.
Special teams played well. Buschini had some good punts, some bad punts. The defense played outstanding. John Hull, what he did today should at least give him uber confidence moving forward.
Mm-hmm.
3 field goals, all longer than any field goal Nebraska had this season.
And right down the
middle.
middle.
He was 1 for 5 coming into the game. Granted, he had, I believe, 2 field goals blocked on that 1 for 5.
Yep.
But, last week people were a little bit questioning, and I even said, why didn't they try a field goal in the fourth quarter? And it was maybe late in the third quarter. It was 28-7. They had a field goal opportunity in their own territory or in Indiana's territory. They go for it on fourth down. They don't get it. And it's like field goal's a unit you've been trying to improve. Well, today they silenced all the doubters because 39, 54, 47 yards from John Hull, a Lincoln Southwest grad, JUCO transfer, really good stuff from him. So. Going back to your original question, I don't think just a bowl game would be satisfying enough the way that this team knows they can play.
Yeah, and I think obviously the big thing is, can you play like you played today next week? Because if you play like you did today against UCLA, you're probably going to win by 2 or 3 touchdowns, you'd have to think, right?
And you want the offense to continue to take strides.
Yeah. Because
the offense had some good chunk plays today, plays they hadn't had. They're still looking for those explosive plays, like obviously it was UTEP, which UTEP's one of the one of the worst teams in college football.
Yeah, they're down there.
It's, just on paper.
Yep.
So, though they had explosive plays that you were like, oh, wow, Deep Denayer on the sidelines, Jamal Banks finding the end zone, even against Northern Iowa, Emmett Johnson had a big run in the second half. So they've had some big plays along so far this season, but you're looking for more explosive plays. You had a 38-yard run by Raiola today. You had a big play from Fedoni, but you had like a Dowdell run that he gets tripped up by Caleb Downs today that I think goes for 16 yards. He was the last guy there.
Yep.
Dowdell makes a move or somehow breaks that tackle, and it's a 55-yard touchdown. Those are the plays that are Nebraska missing on offense. But with the way the defense is playing, it's going to keep them in every game the rest of the season.
Yeah, they're probably,
if they play like they did today.
Yeah, they're probably a favorite against UCLA at home, but then the last 3 games at USC, home against Wisconsin, at Iowa, it's probably 50-50 if they're not underdogs. So again, got to get that bowl game in the books. Hopefully next week, UCLA. That game's going to be 2:30 kick, back on Big Ten Network next week.
I think it's the first time this season they're on the Big Ten Network.
Is it the first time? Were they? I thought it was Northern Iowa on Big Ten Network.
I stand corrected.
Yeah.
I think for the second time this season,
they're
on Big Ten. But they have had, the other thing to Nebraska's credit, like compared to last year, they've had a lot of eyeballs. They've been in the spotlight
a lot of national
a decent
broadcasts.
amount this season. Now, the past 2 weeks, they've been on the other side. They've been the team that's kind of not the main focus, the main fighter, and then you got the guy going against him, right? That's kind of been Nebraska at times this season, with Indiana getting all this attention, big noon kickoff, Ohio State being the 4th team in the country. So, but they've handled some of the pressure pretty well. But yeah, I think they would be okay kind of going a little bit more under the radar the rest of the way and pulling out 2 or 3 more wins.
Yep. So Huskers fall to 5-3, lose to Ohio State again. Now all 3 losses. I mean, Illinois is getting kind of run out of the building by Oregon right now, but 2 of your losses against basically top 10 teams in Indiana now and Ohio State. Again, all things considered, I still think the program's probably pointed in the right trajectory.
Yeah, I think, obviously a lot to, obviously there's going to be things to improve across the board, but just a night and day difference of performance, effort, toughness down the stretch compared to Indiana. It just didn't feel like they rolled over today. And they competed all the way through last week as well, but they just couldn't get anything to work. Today the defense was really promising, and just, you got to be happy with the performance you saw today, despite it being a loss.
100%, I agree. So, sports director Kevin Suits, he's out in Columbus right now. He's working very hard right now as we speak. He's going to have more coverage of this game coming up. Are we on at 6 or 6:30 tonight, Chase?
We're on after the conclusion of the Oregon-Illinois game on CBS. Sometimes their post-game show takes up all of our time, but never knows. But we will have a show at 10, I can guarantee that.
So more coverage coming up tonight, possibly at 6, 6:30. We'll have to see, but then definitely at 10. So appreciate everyone for tuning in and watching another edition of the REPORT Husker Show, sponsored by Fat Dog's Convenience Store. Chase, as always, appreciate your time. Until next time, hope everyone has a nice weekend.
You've been listening to the REPORT Husker Show, sponsored by Fat Dog's Convenience Store. Watch, listen, and stream on the 1011 Now app, on YouTube, or wherever you get your podcasts. For more Husker coverage throughout the week, watch the REPORT on 1011 Sports at 6 and 10 p.m.